there! If you've watched my previous video entitled What is OCD, welcome back to the channel. And if this is your first time here, nice to meet you. My name is Anna, and this is where I post all sorts of videos related to OCD, or obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is a mental illness that I've been struggling with now for about 15 years. So if you're looking to learn about OCD from someone with a lot of first-hand experience, you're definitely in the right place. Today's topic is going to be something that I think is really at the center of the OCD experience. Like, if OCD were a powder keg, this would be the match that sets the whole thing exploding. And for me personally, it was the first hint I got that maybe something not quite normal was going on inside my head. I'm talking about intrusive thoughts. So in my first video, I mentioned that a lot of popular depictions of OCD tend to focus more on compulsions because those are the visible part of OCD. And there's a lot less representation of obsessions, which is kind of weird because obsessions make up at least half of what OCD is, arguably even the bigger half, in my opinion. And for me, intrusive thoughts are really at the root of OCD obsessions. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought intrusive thoughts were completely normal and happened to everybody. If you are, go ahead and give yourself a nice big thumbs up, because you're absolutely right. There's nothing innately abnormal about having intrusive thoughts. In fact, they're so common that people have started making TikToks and memes about them, which is probably the best proof that something is part of the universal human experience and not just something that affects only you. You could be going through the most specifically awful situation ever, but if there's even just one meme about it, at least you're not alone. Now, I don't necessarily relate to a lot of these intrusive thoughts memes, and that's because intrusive thoughts that are specific to OCD tend to be uniquely upsetting, inappropriate, distressing, and persistent. There are a few common themes that these OCD thoughts can center around. The most well-known one is probably contamination, because once again, popular media is really good at spreading this idea that OCD is all about cleaning. But some other greatest hits of OCD also include thoughts that are incredibly violent or sexual in nature. For example, these can be thoughts about taking a knife and butchering yourself or your loved ones in the middle of your kitchen, or thoughts that force you to mentally picture the genitals of a close family member in excruciating detail. People don't tend to make as many jokes about this kind of intrusive thought. I wonder why. These thoughts might be initially triggered by something concrete, like a nightmare you had, or maybe even a horror movie, but eventually they're gonna start coming to you unprompted at the most random and unpredictable of times. And the more they come, the more time you spend thinking about them, the more space they take up in your head, and this is where intrusive thoughts turn into obsessions. So OCD is basically a disorder that involves overthinking about thinking. Why did we have this thought? Where did it come from? What does it mean that we can't stop thinking about it? Could it be that we actually enjoy thinking these thoughts? Oh my god, what's wrong with us? To a point where we spend 99% of our waking life either thinking these thoughts or thinking about these thoughts, and it's mentally exhausting. It can get physically exhausting too, because it sometimes gets in the way of us eating or sleeping or going outside, and it makes us feel like we have absolutely zero control over our thoughts. Now, I want to take a minute here to stress the difference between this kind of OCD obsession and the chronic worry that can come from something like generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. It can be hard to draw the line between the two because they both involve feeling like you can't control or stop your own thoughts. It doesn't help that GAD and OCD are often also comorbid conditions, which means that people can experience both of them at the same time. But the kind of obsessive worrying that comes from GAD tends to be more anchored in reality and focus on things that happen in everyday life. Like, oh, did I forget to turn off the stove before leaving? Or did I remember to lock the door this morning? Whereas OCD obsessions tend to focus on weirder, more unlikely events that are outside the realm of what you'd expect to see in everyday life, like a brutal murder, for example. OCD obsessions also tend to be more graphic and based on mental imagery rather than fully articulated thoughts. It's kind of like being forced to read through the worst flip book ever, where something horrible happens on every page to either you or people you care about. You could also say that it's like being constantly jump scared by your own brain. You'll be doing your thing, just going about your day, when suddenly OCD is like, hi, did someone order the most graphic, mentally disturbing image ever? No? Well, here it is anyway. If you've ever seen the movie A Clockwork Orange, that one scene where the protagonist gets brainwashed is a pretty accurate representation of intrusive thoughts and obsessions.
I had truly done my best morning and afternoon to play it their way and sit like a horror show cooperative malchick in the chair of torture while they flashed nasty bits of ultra-violence on the screen.
The only difference is that you're doing it to yourself and you don't know why you're doing it and you hate it, but you can't stop. For those of you who are interested in reading more about OCD and mental illness in general, this is where you might come across the word ego dystonic. Now, this is basically a fancy way to describe thoughts that feel foreign to yourself and as a result cause a lot of distress and a sense of inner conflict. OCD intrusive thoughts and OCD obsessions are ego dystonic. This means that I know these are my thoughts, but they don't feel right in a way. They don't feel like they mesh with my values or my thoughts about the world or my view of myself. And I definitely don't enjoy having these thoughts, and I would rather not be thinking them. This is opposed to what we call ego syntonic thoughts, which are thoughts that are in line with your values and beliefs about the world or yourself. Now, there are mental disorders that cause ego syntonic symptoms. For example, if someone has narcissistic personality disorder and they have a thought that they're better than everyone else, that thought will usually be ego syntonic, which means that it won't cause them any distress or a sense of inner conflict because they genuinely believe it to be true. I really hope I'm making sense so far because it's been years for me of dealing with these intrusive thoughts, but it still feels very hard and strange to describe just how foreign they feel when they pop up in my head. It's like finding something that's not yours in your underwear drawer when you live alone. As I've said at the start of this video, intrusive thoughts are not a sign of mental illness in and of themselves. So if you deal occasionally with intrusive thoughts, don't worry about it. That doesn't have to mean that you're mentally ill. Plenty of people have intrusive thoughts and they're able to brush it off. It's just that those of us who have OCD, we have a much harder time letting go of these thoughts. They make us feel very unsafe and scared, like there's something dreadfully wrong and we need to make it right urgently. And that's where compulsions come in. These seemingly random, weird, often very convoluted behaviors are a way for us to feel like we're taking back some kind of control. There are a lot of different theories about why people with OCD are so vulnerable to intrusive thoughts. Some researchers have noted that many of us tend to have an exaggerated sense of personal responsibility. We also tend to overestimate how much our negative thoughts can affect others, which means that for us, something like just having an intrusive thought can make us feel like we're immoral or a dangerous person. Like, you had a horrible thought. That means you're a horrible person. But I don't want to be a horrible person. That sucks. Well, I guess you better find a way to not be a horrible person then. What do I do? You have to flick the light switch 3 times before you walk into a room. Any room. Wait a minute. What does this have to do with me not being a horrible person? Hello? In case you're feeling really sad for me right now, I want to clarify that this is not how my life is 24/7. And that's going to be true for the majority of people with OCD. Of course, we all have varying levels of severity in this disorder, but this is a condition that tends to have ups and downs. It tends to come in phases. And usually people will go through different types of intrusive thoughts or different OCD themes, so to speak. Not all of our thoughts are intrusive, thank God. And all intrusive thoughts are not equally powerful. Personally, I probably have thousands of intrusive thoughts every day, and I can dismiss most of them most of the time. So most of the time, I'm able to act like quote unquote a normal person. It's just that every once in a while, there'll be one thought that just sinks in like a fishhook. And that's when I know that I'm due to get back on the OCD merry-go-round from hell. So this is pretty much the gist of intrusive thoughts and obsessions, at least from my perspective. Once again, OCD is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, and it can look very different from one person to another, and all I can really do is share my own experience. If you also deal with OCD, I hope you've been able to recognize yourself in this video at least a little bit. This is a disorder that by definition seeks to trap us in our own heads and suffocate us in there. So I think that remembering that other people also go through this can be very helpful. It can allow us to take more distance towards our own thoughts, which is something we desperately need to do. It's honestly one of the reasons that I started this channel in the first place. And if you know someone who has OCD and you're trying to understand what they've been going through, I hope this video has helped you understand their experience a little better. Thank you for watching. The next video is going to be about compulsions, because that seems like the next logical step after doing this little deep dive on obsessions. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe for more, or even leave a comment below if you have any questions or suggestions about topics that you'd want me to cover. Thanks, and bye.